Hello, everybody, and welcome in to this edition of the Autzen Audibles podcast. I'm your host, Jared Mack. With me, as always, good friend, colleague, Erik Skopil. Erik, how we doing today?
Can't complain. Can't complain. We're talking Ducks. It's the off season. It's the fun part. I don't know if that's true or
Uh,
not, but
I don't think that's true.
it is a fun part to at least talk about what this team might look like in 8 months.
Yeah, that's always the fun part. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing today on this podcast. First up, we're going to talk about the recent addition of Emmanuel Pregnon, the USC transfer. And then later on the podcast, we are going to talk defensive two deep. I posted this a while ago. It's just been it's just taken a while to get on the podcast, and that's okay. But we're going to do it today. But first, like I just said, we're going to go over this Pregnan edition. Top 15 player in the country. I think it was top 12 in the country in the transfer portal the last time I checked. 6'5", 320-pound interior offensive line, Emmanual Pregnon, a transfer from USC, the number 2 interior offensive line in the transfer portal. This is a Sorry, somebody is unloading something in front of my apartment complex. This is a big time addition for Oregon here. If there was some grave concerns, we talked about it on Monday's podcast in the mailbag. It was the interior offensive line that was kind of the question mark, and this, kind of eliminates a lot of those questions going into next season. I think this is a massive addition for Oregon. As a massive player physically, and all the other ways as well. Like Pregnan's been a multi-year starter at USC and then at Wyoming the year before. And this is a big addition. I think that this can really solidify some offensive line help for, Dante Moore, who, might be a starter, might be Austin Novosad, but regardless, neither of those guys have, started a game for Oregon in their careers. I know Dante did at UCLA, but it's been a while. It's been a whole year for him that he hasn't really gone out there and played football every down. So the more protection, the better, I think, in this case.
Yeah, that's been one of my low-key kind of talking points so far this offseason is just surrounding whichever young quarterback it is with as much talent as possible, right? And they got the two pillars at tackle, we think, with World and Harkey. Now they get the guard. They've obviously gone out and landed Mekhi Hughes, the big-time running back from Tulane. Receiver, they return quite a bit. They have a lot of young players that are exciting. Obviously, DeCorian Moore's presence. So I think this is, to your point about kind of whichever quarterback it is, like this is significant to have an offensive line retooled this way. And frankly, given the way Alik Terry, like I understand people being, I don't know if I agree or co-sign it, but I understand people being like, okay, when are we going to start seeing some of the high school kids that he's recruited play? I get that Poncho is really the only one that he was kind of involved with. I know technically Clem closed that one, but Terry was involved late to kind of, I should say,
Clem started, Terry
Clem
closed.
started, Terry closed. Exactly. So I get some of that complaint, but if you wanted to talk about what's happened once these offensive lines have been put together, back-to-back years as Joe Moore Award finalists, and I don't want to put those kind of lofty expectations around this group, considering 60% of it are transfer players who we've never seen play here. But you could make the argument just looking around at the portal rankings and say Oregon's landed 2 of the top 3 or 4 in World and in Pregnan now. Harkey was one of PFF's favorite right tackles in the country at Texas State. Mm-hmm. And just in general, you have to feel like that offensive line is a lot more experienced than it looked like it might be just a couple of right before the season was set to end. And you have to feel really good about the talent you're bringing in, because I know World and Pregnan in particular are 2 guys that people think are legitimate NFL talents, and that'll be drafted in the first couple of days of that draft if they pan out the way they're supposed to. So positional fit wise, left guard was where this guy played exclusively, I think, at USC.
Yeah,
Jared,
just left guard. Yeah, a little bit of right at Wyoming, but that was a long time ago,
several years ago. Feels like you got your plug and play left guard. Feels like you've got
absolutely.
One thing that was interesting, not to go too far down this, but we're kind of hitting offensive line. Did you see Zaire Addison's comments about Isaiah World being a right tackle? I did. I was flummoxed.
2 things popped in my brain. Either Zaire Addison is very good, and I think he will one day be very good. I don't necessarily think that he will be very good to start. It's really hard for a true freshman to be a starting left tackle. Number 2 is that there's somebody on the roster who is vying for that left tackle position. And I think it's Janoris Wilson. as a guy who could potentially be that left tackle just because of his size and his speed, his agility. He's been used a little bit more often this year.
Sure.
We won't find out really honestly until April. That was an interesting little nugget. But that's kind of where my brain went to. And I think it's more of the latter, with Wilson being a potential regular contributor, with probably Harkey being your extra offensive lineman. Because for as much as we put those two guys like as the starting tackles, like Oregon's losing a lot of their depth this year too. Like, a guy like Nashad Struther was depth, and then he had to become, the starting offensive lineman, or the starting left guard, excuse me, for most of the season. But you lose him, you lose Harper, like you lose guys who are real depth pieces who can come and plug and play. So you're going to need a lot of them too. So maybe that's Harkey. Maybe he is the starting left tackle, right tackle, but definitely an interesting nugget from Zaire.
Yeah, it was. And it kind of makes me reshuffle a little bit of what we thought, because I had thought prior to Pregnon, and with the idea that Bedford was going to get another year, which we haven't, I don't believe, seen anything finalized with that quite yet.
Nothing yet.
I had thought we were like, okay, we've got a pretty logical. We talked about it, I think, last week when Matt and I ran through the offense on the 2 deep. I thought it was pretty logical of like, World is your left tackle. Iuli probably plays left guard. You've got Poncho's your center. Right guard's Bedford. Right tackle is Harkey. Well, now I'm going like, well, Pregnon's your left guard. If World's your right tackle, and let's say it's Janoris is your left tackle, it's like this is now getting very interesting in terms of like what happens at guard with Bedford, with Iuli, with some of these guys down the road here. So offensive line had felt kind of logical after they landed the 2 tackles and what we knew there. And now with a little bit of different information, and maybe World does ultimately end up at left tackle, and there was miscommunication between Addison and the staff or something, which is certainly possible. But all of this kind of new information and the addition of Pregnon, who again, I want to make sure listeners understand this is a really nice and big addition, especially to take someone from USC, and USC fans not handling it great. Not handling it great. But there's just a little bit more question marks here than I thought maybe there would be right now. And as Jared said, I think we'll probably get hopefully a better sense of that by late April, around the spring game.
Could be October too. But.
could be. That was this last year, basically.
Yeah, basically. I think the Pregnon edition we talked about on Monday's podcast, it was like they seem to have solidified some of their line. Like they'll, the left or right guard situation was the question mark, and it's like it's going to take a guy like that, the number 2 overall offensive lineman in the transfer portal, to say, yeah, you should take that guy. And it's like, well, they did, which was a smart idea. The same thing, like where I think we talked about it on Monday as well. We're just kind of rehashing everything that we did a couple of days ago. But the development thing, like we're like, oh, you're not playing the high school kids, stuff like that. The team is better with this move, and you could argue that there could be a potential player like a Kavika Rogers, or I don't know, maybe it's somebody from last year's class who steps in and becomes a full-time contributor, or it's Janoris Wilson who steps in and becomes a full-time contributor. Like, you are taking a risk in that measure. And this is a program who has now elevated itself to the point where they don't want to take risks. They would much rather get a guy that they've seen play at the Power 4 level for multiple years and do quite well at it. Even at with an offensive system at USC, which is not very similar to Oregon's, but it is a lot of spread offense, and he understands how to control that system. Like, they don't want to take risks. They're going to go get the number 2 offensive lineman in the portal and plug and play him and give him and give their quarterbacks and their skill position guys more time to do something with the ball. Like, I think it's a great idea. I think it makes the team a lot better. And I understand it's like, oh, they're not like developing. Like, I think it's a very false narrative that people present on social media networks that get people too riled up, considering the fact that every transfer, more or less, that Oregon has taken on in the last couple of years has done better at Oregon than their previous institution and is now in line to be drafted. Like, you look at a guy like Derek Harmon, you look at even Dylan Gabriel, who's been around college football for 5 years before that, had his best career year statistically, and has gotten a lot of draft stock because that's not something he got last year, because that's why he entered the portal. So it's more than just developing high school kids, and this is only Dan's first class is only in their junior year now. and his first real class is just heading into their, his first class in 22, I guess, is now heading into their senior year technically. But there's
Yeah.
only 4 kids left from that class because they're all in the transfer portal. They're all going to the NFL. And so his first true class is just heading into their junior year. Like when you compare Oregon, to schools like Ohio State or Alabama of old, like this has been 10, 15 years of repeated top 5 classes. Like this is not what Oregon has been doing the last 15 years. So it'll take time for, I guess, all the young kids to come up and develop. But for now, if you're taking a guy like Pregnon, there should be no complaining anywhere. This is great. This is a huge addition to the program. You take one from your rival. You have a guy who's probably going to be a future NFLer, and you provide, like we were talking about earlier, you provide one of your young quarterbacks with offensive line help, which is much, much needed and a must-have if you're going to go trot out Dante Moore or Austin Novosad.
And we should just mention here a couple things broadly. Oregon's transfer portal class is awesome. Really, really good. Once again, back to back years where it's just like you look around, you go like, I think they've added half a dozen starters and a bunch of other guys that are going to be contributors. And you look at the average recruit ranking, I think it's the best of any class in the portal currently.
It is, yeah.
It's a class and a group that we expect to grow, but just for folks who aren't paying quite as close attention to the calendar, I don't know how much it'll grow until we get post-spring. And I say that because basically the entire crop of players who are in the portal or who can be in the portal until spring are in there right now, with the exception of, I guess, some of those semifinal schools. I don't know if the window's quite passed yet, probably really close to kind of finalizing that. And then obviously Ohio State and Notre Dame still have their windows after the national championship.
I think this is there's the 48-hour rule after, so it probably won't be until the end of the week where the semifinal games are up. But yeah, the semifinal game is on the 10th, so today's the 15th. You get 5 days after, but then there's the 48-hour window. Stupid.
Yeah, so I guess
Monday. Next Monday.
I think though we kind of feel, and maybe not, maybe some names will pop up, but in terms of the players that are in there, I don't know how many more we expect from either Texas or Penn State. And so, but just broadly, like I wouldn't expect there to be a whole lot of activity from now until, March and I guess April. Because different schools have different spring calendars, and so there will be some variance. There might be players who enter before that, but just kind of giving you a sense, like Oregon's done really, really well to this point. It's possible there's not much movement for a couple more months, and that gives us more time just to break down what this team could be. Which, unless you have anything else, Jared, we can do after the break.
I don't think I have anything else. I was just going to bring up, I quickly PFF'd Isaiah World, and he played every snap last year as a left tackle. And going back to the conversation with Zaire Addison. So he did play right tackle the year before. Like that was more of like a developmental year. It's like, hey, you're pretty darn good. We don't trust you enough to play left tackle and not have our quarterback get killed. So we're going to play you at right tackle. And then this last year, he was an excellent left tackle for Nevada. I don't know exactly what it means. I think it'd be really interesting to find out.
Yeah.
But there's a couple possibilities here. But I just think it's, he played like 800 snaps last year at 854 at left tackle. Started every game for Nevada. Like World in my world, no jokes, is a left tackle to me. And he's a ginormous human. He's like 6'8", 315 pounds. Like that sounds like a left tackle to me.
This was where my confusion came from the Addison part. We don't have to relitigate this too much, but just like if you looked at PFF's snap counts, Harkey only played this last year at Texas State. He was full-time right tackle. I thought World played left tackle the last 2 years, right tackle the year before that. So either way, I thought he was basically purely a left tackle, which is why I was kind of taken aback from what Zaire had shared in that article Matt wrote a couple of days ago. So maybe it's just a true freshman getting something wrong. Maybe they think he's a better right tackle, and that's how it'll play out. That'll be information we'll have at a later date. But certainly a lot kind of shifting here in the offensive line. And personally, I think a lot shifting in a really positive manner, especially like we kind of, joked a little bit about Zaire thinking he can start. I don't expect that to be the case, but maybe he comes in, he's much better than we think he expected to be.
You never know.
And this is somebody who can contribute in some regard as a true freshman in 2025.
Yeah, Zaire was somebody who kind of rocketed up the rankings
Mm-hmm.
during his junior summer into his senior year. Like I always look at, I don't want to, in no way am I comparing the two, but I always look at Panay Sewell, who was, a very highly touted recruit, but he wasn't a 5-star. Like he was a top 60 kid in the country. He wasn't this bona fide, everybody needs to know this person, number one offensive tackle in the country, like how Josh Connerly was as a recruit. Number one offensive tackle, number one offensive lineman. Like that's not who Panay Sewell was, but Panay Sewell came in here and kicked ass for 2 years and then, went to the NFL and is now still kicking ass. So there's some of the times with recruiting, it's tough because Zaire is obviously a very highly touted recruit, top 100 kid in the country, but you don't know until they get here. And that's the problem with recruiting. That's the further problem with the development thing where they come to campus and it's not exactly what you expect it to be. But
Sure.
we can move on. We can end this discussion about Pregnan and everything else in the offensive line. But first, we will take a quick little break. All right, we are back from our quick little break, and now we're going to discuss Oregon's potential defensive two-deep for next year, written by yours truly. Eric, do you want to become the host for a second and ask me about it, or do you want me to just kind of throw my stuff? Oh, there you go.
I'll shift. We'll do a little box shift there. I'll be left box. You can be right box. Yeah, and we'll just jump right into this, and we'll run through it like we do with the offense when we did this last week, and just go position group by position group, and we'll start defensive line, which I'll be honest, Jared, I'm like super excited about what this can be, and also really intrigued by just all the names that we're going to include in this conversation, because there are some position groups where you look at it and go like, boy, I don't know. Like we're going to get to one at linebacker where it's like, oh boy, where's the depth? This is one where there should be a ton of depth, but basically all of it is unproven. So we know what they lose. Jamari Caldwell, we should note, just entered the draft yesterday. So that possibility of him taking advantage of the Diego Pavia rule won't be something he'll do. So you can scratch his name off any list like this. But even without him, without Harmon, without Birch, I'm still looking at this, Jared, and I don't know if listeners will agree, but I'm still looking at this going like there's a really high ceiling with all the talent that's so why don't you go ahead and run through what you've got here?
Yeah, of course. Defensive end, I have Mateo Uiagalelei taking over for Jordan Birch. I just think he's the better body type for this position compared to Tatum Tuioti, who I'll get to in a second. Backing him up at Ashton Porter, another guy who is like, I wouldn't say as an overall like big contributor this year, but like it's clear the team likes him. He was always one of the first guys off the bench when I came to like garbage time, which I know it's garbage time. They're going to let everybody out there, but there is a hierarchy even in garbage time. Moving on to nose tackle, I've got Amari Washington starting. He's basically just going to take over for Caldwell. I never had Caldwell on my two deep just because I didn't think that he would return. I thought that somebody in the NFL was really going to like him, and I still think that's going to be the case. He's probably going to be a day 3 pick, but he's going to be drafted. Behind him, I have Tioni Gray or Jericho Johnson. This was people had some problems with me with this one for picking Gray and Jericho over Terrence Green. I look at Terrence Green, and I think he's more of a true nose or a true D tackle, excuse me, rather than a nose. Gray and Jericho, Gray specifically, I think the staff really likes. Like they played him, I think 25 snaps this year. He had played in 4 games, conserved his red shirt. He's just a bigger body too. And that's what you want from your nose tackle. You want somebody built like Jamari Caldwell. I think Tioni Gray and Jericho Johnson, as long as he loses some of the weight that he had from high school, I think could be the same thing, just a big body guy. So he could be one of the highest risers, I think, in Johnson. But I think Gray is up there. And I have, for the defensive tackle, I have Bear Alexander starting, the transfer from USC. And then I did have Michael Gardner, but he's gone. He went to Arizona State. So it's going to be either Aiden Breland, who showed some potential this year, or Terrence Green, who got into 7 games this year, played 36 snaps. But I just look at those situations, and you look at Green, who was in his redshirt freshman season this last year, playing only 36 snaps in 7 games, while Tioni Gray got 23 and 4. You just kind of look at that and you say, okay, Like, that's interesting where you're not conserving this guy's red shirt. You have the only person ahead of Green on the depth chart theoretically was Keon Ware-Hudson, and he couldn't get in front of him as a younger guy, which is more important in this sense. So what's that say about him? Who knows? But we'll find out eventually. But I do think that he could be a solid contributor next year. I just think he's got great size and skill. But just kind of is my reasoning as to why I had like Gray and Jericho as in the nose tackle. But lastly, outside linebacker, that edge position, that Sam or Jack linebacker, Tatum Tuioti is a starter, and then Blake Purchase or Elijah Rushing as the backups. Tuioti, not much needs to be said, was awesome this year. Purchase, you talked to him, Eric, at the Rose Bowl. Like the red shirt was planned. He'll be back next season. I think he can be a real contributor. He showed he could be a real contributor in his freshman year, but they just needed bodies in that first year that he was here. And now they don't necessarily need them anymore, and he can go specialize and become something specific, whether that be an edge rusher on third down and longs or an everyday outside linebacker and move Tatum somewhere else to the defensive end position or whatever. And then Elijah Rushing, this is all just projection. Yeah. There's not there. He didn't play a lot. I'm trying to see how many things that he actually got in. 4 games, 18 total snaps. Just a lot of projection, but he has the best NFL like body archetype like on the entire roster, in my opinion. I think that he's like the perfect built edge rusher. He's like 6'6", 255 pounds. He can add 15 to 20 pounds on his frame with ease, and I don't think that he's going to lose speed. So if Elijah is a big contributor next year, I think it's going to be in those third down and long situations where he can just rush the passer, unless he gains the 15 to 20 pounds, because he's just going to get bodied like he kind of did this year. But that's okay because he's just a redshirt freshman.
You kind of ran through Tatum, and I understand that because his job is locked in. I just don't know if we've spent enough time appreciating his development this last year. So I wanted to take a second and just acknowledge that.
I don't think we do either.
Because Mateo takes all the headlines, and he should. I mean,
exactly.
Mateo had an awesome season, 10.5 sacks. I thought Tatum really took a step in basically every aspect of this. 5.5 sacks is impressive, but I thought his play in space was much, much better. His tackling was better. His play on rundowns is getting better. Both Mateo and Tatum need to improve in that area. I think that was something we saw towards the end of the season, as this team's kind of highlighting off tackle run plays because maybe Oregon's, defensive ends and edges weren't able to set the edge quite as well. But I think, between Mateo and Tatum, you have to feel awesome about what you have on the outside of your defensive line. Like, these are two guys. Mateo is going to be a first-round draft pick. I don't know exactly where Tatum is, but he's going to have a chance to be drafted early enough that he's going to have an NFL career, in my opinion. Because I was actually going to say, he reminds me of, and I just blanked on the last name, but Utah's defensive line coach has 2 kids that are playing in the NFL. One of them was just drafted a cycle ago, kind of undersized, same kind of deal. I'll look this up. But my point was, like, technically these are guys who've been developed by defensive line coaches their entire lives and just have a sense of how to play the position. And so while the measurables for Tatum at 6'3", 255 maybe aren't day 1, day 2 pick, I think he does enough. I'll look up this Utah player here in a second. I think to have an opportunity to have a solid enough career, maybe not somebody who's taken super early though.
Yeah, I don't think he would be taken early just because of the measurables and the ceiling. I think his ceiling is high, but not like it's not as high as like Mateo's. If you're going to compare two Oregon players at the same time,
sure.
Like Mateo could be a real monster, and he's a better athlete and he's got better measurables. But what Tatum does is he uses his strength to his advantage, and he uses his technical skills to his advantage. Like, he was second on the team last year in pressures, in case you didn't know. He had 3 more than Mateo and 1 more than Jordan, or 2 more than Jordan Birch. Like, he got after the quarterback. It just he didn't get the 10.5 sacks like Mateo did. And that was the only thing. But he was a monster. And like you ran through, his coverage skills were much improved from last year, but that's what they need him to do. That's what Mace Funa couldn't do the 2 years prior. And if he can turn into an all-around player like that, this is a long time from now, but I don't think he'll be a day one pick, but he could be, Matt Milano-esque, the Buffalo Bills outside linebacker, who's a little undersized but is technically sound. I think he got, former Boston College Eagle. Like, I think he got 10 and a half sacks 2 or 3 years ago. He's been hurt recently, but he can make coverage, or he can go out in coverage and make plays, and he can stop people at the line of scrimmage. He's strong enough, and then he can get after the quarterback because of his technical skills, not just his athleticism. So I think Milano was a 3rd or 4th round pick. Like, I think Tatum, I don't know. I think he could have a really long career. I was going to say something stupid, but I'm going to withhold from that.
Luther Ellis is Utah's defensive line coach. Son is Jonah Ellis. He was picked in the 3rd round last year. 6'2",
he was really good at Utah.
He was 6'2", 245. So that to me, that was the comparison I was trying to make. Son of a coach, a little undersized, maybe doesn't have all of the physical tools that leap off the page, but does enough well that he was a 3rd round draft pick and actually played. I was looking at this, 38 tackles, 5 sacks as a rookie for the Broncos this year. So again, not saying it's a 1-to-1 comparison. I was just thinking of somebody that sort of projected somewhat similarly in my mind, and that was a name that came to mind. The defensive tackle, nose tackle group is really fascinating, Jared, for me. I think we've been expecting Amari to take this step and be ready to shine for a couple of years. And whenever this guy's in the game, I don't want to say every snap, but it seems like a lot of the times it kind of pops and you watch it on rewatch and maybe he doesn't make the play in the game. It doesn't show up in the stats, but you go, gosh, his quickness off the snap was so impressive. He really impacted that play. I'm really curious to see what he can be this year as a guy we've been excited about for a couple of years. Obviously, Bear Alexander is this, I don't want to say great unknown. 2 years ago at USC, he played really, really well. This last year and his year at Georgia didn't do a whole lot. And in both cases, ended up leaving the team basically prematurely. And so there's some question marks about what you'll get from him. But gosh, if they can get him dialed in and focused and maximized, this is a guy who has day 1, day 2 NFL draft tools, and he could definitely be that kind of a player if he's focused. And then I'm still fascinated by this Gray, Johnson. I know you had Terrence Green kind of with the different group, but I was doing the averages. Those are 3 first or second year freshmen that are 6'5" on average and 333 pounds on average. That is a gargantuan group of guys. And it's exactly right. It's exactly what you need when you go look at what you see in the SEC from interior defensive linemen, these big, rangy, but really stocky, well put together guys. And if just 1 or 2 of those 3 guys is a difference maker right now, and you get what you expect out of Washington, Alexander, and let's just throw Breland in there as somebody who got some Rose Bowl snaps like kind of early in that game, clearly somebody they thought was coming along late. But like if they can just get like the best out of those 5 or 6 guys, I'm telling you, people are concerned because it's not a bunch of veteran names here. I'm telling you, this can be a really, really good defensive line for Oregon. And maybe a group, I won't say it's better than this year because I think this year's group has a couple of guys that are going to go really early. But like just from physical tools perspective, this group has a really, really high upside. And I'm really fascinated to watch them come together.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there should be any worry about this group. I worried about last year's group because you were really relying on people to take that extra step, Mateo and Tatum. Like you felt good about Birch and Caldwell and Harmon, but then there was the guys behind them that you really were worried about. And then you didn't have enough, like there weren't enough veterans in the room. This year, I think that there's a good mix of veterans and guys who've just actually gotten playing time. Like obviously Mateo and Tatum are your veterans, as is Barry Alexander. And Amari Washington, to a lesser degree, is your veteran, even though this is just his 3rd year in the program. And he redshirted his 1st year, if I remember correctly. But that's a really good group. I love Amari Washington. I'm glad that he's going to have his time to shine this year. He was really good this past year for Oregon. It just is unfortunate that he was playing behind 2 future NFL players. Like, there's not much you can do about that. Like, and good for him for just saying, okay, cool. Like, I'm going to stick with you guys because like we can develop here and do well, and not just leave because they brought in Harmon, they brought in Caldwell. Like those were positions and needs, and Washington is now going to be the starter this year or this upcoming season with Bear Alexander to his right or his left. Like it's pretty sick. I think that's going to be a really good duo. And the thing about Bear, he had some struggles to say the least at USC this year with kind of the coaching staff and everything. We'll probably find out eventually at a media session as to what that was, but he's a monster when he's in the game. his last season at USC, where he played the full 12 or 13 games, whatever they played, I think he had 36, 38 pressures, which would have been second on the team this year behind Derek Harmon. Like, he's a real monster on the interior. And if Dan has had a good track record of guys who have been labeled as having like head cases or anything like that at other schools by their fans, like, he's had a really good track record of getting them into the system, teaching them how to play football, and putting their heads on straight and having them produce on the field. So we'll see if Dan can, replicate that again this year with Bear.
Yeah, that's pretty imperative for this group, because if you were to theoretically remove his name, not that I think this group goes from being awesome to terrible, it does take away probably your most
it's a big
physically gifted guy decision, and also your most experienced guy.
Yep.
And so this is where you hope there's been, and you expect based upon Dan's track record, the due diligence and the understanding of what's going on, and that this isn't like a Jonte Cook situation at Washington where they signed this big time former 5-star recruit and then he doesn't make it through a month on campus. Like,
not great.
That's a terrible outcome, and that's not one I expect to happen here. But that's at least has to be kind of like in the realm. I hate to say realm of possibilities, but based on his track record, it hasn't been consistent. And those who are listening, I've heard people say, like, "Are we saying he's a bad kid?" No one's saying that. It's just based upon the nomadic nature of his career so far, and what information is currently present is that he just hasn't been able to finish at two different schools. And I'm again trusting Dan will be able to get that figured out for Oregon. All right, linebacker. Gosh, is it huge that Bryce Betcher's back?
Yes. Yeah. Just very important.
Just going through this, Jared, just going through this, and what you'll do in a second, his return, and I guess the alternative universe where he does not return, like, you could get a sense of how different you feel about these groups based upon, I know it's just one player, but a player of his caliber, with his experience and what's also left on the roster here. I think you just, when you go through this exercise and you look through it, you appreciate more and more what his return means for this defense.
Yeah, 100%. And I have him starting at the Mack linebacker position with Devin Jackson at the money, Jerry Mixon backing up Bryce at the Mack, and then Kamar Mathuti backing up Jackson at the money. For those unfamiliar, Mack and money is just how Oregon designates their linebackers. Mack is more of the physical, like, broader, bigger guy who is more downhill in run game, and then the money linebacker is the Jeffrey Bassa, Devin Jackson, more athletic guys who can go out into space and cover somebody. I mean, they're both used interchangeable, but primarily Bryce is a money and Bryce is a Mack and Devin is a money. And that's how I have it playing out. I like the starting group because I'm very high on Devin Jackson. I think he's a perfect money linebacker in this system. And Bryce he's now a chiseled veteran in Oregon football and was the team's leading tackler this year. I think preseason I talked about how somebody told me that Bryce could be even better as a linebacker in the Big Ten just because of the way that they played, the way that the conference played. And lo and behold, that was exactly the case. And I'd expect him to do something very similar this upcoming season. I think he needs to add more weight. I think he needs to become stronger. And I think this will be his first year, whole offseason, strictly focusing on football, which I think will be very beneficial to him because obviously he's played baseball in years before. So I think that'll be really beneficial to him in terms of adding weight, getting stronger while trying to keep his athleticism. So I think he'll be great at the Mack position. And then Devin Jackson, like I said, athletically is one of the most gifted players on the team. And I thought he was really impressive in spurts this year.
Yeah.
Where they needed him when Jeff Bassa was dealing with an injury. And I think he'll be really good as a starting linebacker. It'll be much different. It'll kind of hurt not to see Jeff out there because that's just what we've been used to the last couple of years. Yeah. But I think Devin will become a household favorite in no time. And then backing him up, Jerry Mixon's been the backup Mack at practice. This was the Justin Jacobs spot. I don't know. I think he's the most physically developed. He's the oldest kid in that linebacking room right now. He's the most physically developed. I don't remember what he's listed at, but he's a big boy, like probably 6'2", 235, something that you need at that position. And then for Kamar Mathuti, I just thought last year that he was the most physically developed of the new freshmen other than Braden Platt. But Platt seems to have hit his like ceiling in terms of what his body can be. And I think Mathuti has another step to go. And I think that his profile and what he played, how he played in high school, really fits in this money position. So this is a group that could like introduce a linebacker through the portal. I think that could be beneficial just as a third back, just in case somebody gets hurt. Just another veteran in the room, because right now it's a senior, it's a redshirt junior, I believe, Devin Jackson, a redshirt sophomore, Jerry Mixon, and then 3 redshirt freshmen. So there's 2 upperclassmen, and I not that I don't think that this group is talented enough to overcome that, but it helps. It helps to have guys who are just older in the room.
Well, and one thing we should know, because we talk about this a lot at receiver, of how, like, hey, with Oregon, they basically played a 4-man rotation the entire time Dan's been here. At linebacker, it's basically been a 3 or a 4-man inside linebacker rotation the whole time that Dan has been here. And last year, it really was 3 guys who played. I was looking at this yesterday just to kind of get a feel for the snap counts. Jeff played the most. It was like 570, I want to say. But I was surprised how many Bryce and Devin played in terms of how similar their snap counts were. They're both like in the 420 to 480 range, I want to say. So you're looking at 2 guys who played a lot together last year. And so, like, I think it's pretty straightforward just to say those 2 guys are going to be in that group of 3 or 4 that play 400 plus snaps this year. And then it becomes identifying the other guys who contribute. And I'm with you, Jared. I think it's tough, especially with Jerry, who has been a rotational player the last couple of years, but not really played enough to really know what you have. You know,
it's a garbage time. Yeah.
Rotational is probably too strong of a word actually for him, but like we've seen him play, but just not enough to draw any conclusions. I know some people are saying, "Oh, he had that great sack against Stanford 2 years ago." I don't know how much that meant. I really don't. I don't know if that means
2 years
anything.
ago. Yeah,
it was 2 years ago against a really awful Stanford team. Not to mean that, not to say that play doesn't matter, but I just don't know how impactful that really is. But these are the sort of data points we're having to rely on right now because these guys just haven't played very much. So yeah, it is to me like totally up in the air what they do for the rest of that 3 or 4 player rotation that they're probably going to play. I'm with you, and this was my biggest position of go find a portal ad. This is the one where I look at it and I go, there's just not a lot there. If they don't go add a portal player, I think this is a vote of confidence from the staff, much like it was a year ago with defensive line where they just took the 2 and said we wanted to rely on our younger players a little bit more. I think that's what that would be telling me, is that they feel good about Mixon, Mathuti, Platt, Williams, Gavin Nix, who they just signed, that they feel good enough about that group not to take another one. But this would be a position where if somebody pops up after spring and it's a player who doesn't even have to be a starting caliber player, but it can be a rotational experienced linebacker, I absolutely think it's worth kicking the tires and maybe taking one here, because there's just a lot of questions with the rest of this group. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing, because Mathuti, Platt, and Williams, I believe, were like 3 of the 4 highest rated inside linebackers in the West Coast last year. Like these are really good, exciting young players. But to the point we made earlier on Pregnan, it doesn't have to be necessarily an issue of development. It's also just an issue of trying to get the best players and put them on the field. And if you feel like you can get someone in the portal, I think they'll do that here.
Yeah, they just need somebody to fill the Justin Jacobs, Connor Soley role. And I think, honestly, losing Connor Soley hurts a lot because he was such an integral part of their special teams. And
that's true.
They like special teams. Nobody thinks about it until it's too late, and the other team is running down the field for a kickoff return or a punt return touchdown. But he was really important in that special teams unit. Him and Bryce Betcher. Oregon has always kind of shown a tendency to play starters on their special teams unit, so I'm sure Bryce will continue to do that. But it wouldn't hurt to get somebody else as a special teams ace to get down there on the field. So if they can find somebody like that, great. But like you said, Eric, if they decide, look, this 5-6 man room we're comfortable with, I think that's, like you said, a huge vote of confidence to them. It shows the confidence from the staff to not add anybody else and just say, look, we like where we're at. We're going to trust our guys, some of the younger guys, some of the older guys, and we feel good going into next season. So it'll be an interesting one to follow, but I just don't think it wouldn't hurt if they just added one more guy. But then you're having like 7 linebackers on the roster, almost 8 linebackers on the roster. So
Mhm.
it becomes a numbers game. Maybe you see somebody transfer out during spring, maybe you don't, but one more guy would be great, but I don't think it's a necessity.
And then just last thing I had at linebackers, what do we think the ceiling actually is for Bryce? Like, I think he could be an All-American. Is that crazy?
He's got to get a ton of tackles to be an All-American. Like, I know that he had 94 this year, which is already a good amount. Like, I think that's the most since Troy Dye.
It is.
But you have to be an absolute freak. Like the first team linebacker for ESPN, which is I was looking at earlier, Sean Dolak out of Buffalo. You want to take a guess at how many tackles he had this year?
186.
Oof, close. Switch those numbers around.
168.
168.
Or I should have guessed 861. That would have been a better
861 would have been better. Yeah. 168, 18 and a half tackles for loss and 5 interceptions.
Okay.
Like he could be All-American talent. Don't get me wrong, but the All-American linebacker numbers are always skewed by kids like that, where they're playing lesser divisions and have 8 million tackles.
He'll be a PFF All-American, and that's really what matters.
And that's what he was this year.
I know he was. That's that, and I guess that's kind of what made me think of it. Is just like people. I remember at the beginning of the year, people were like, "Oh, we can't play this guy. He's not very good. It's a good story kind of thing." And then it was like, "Oh no, actually, PFF, which again, mileage may vary,
for better or worse, yeah,
right? Thinks this guy's he finished with the 4th best grade of any inside linebacker in the country this year. So that was what the impetus for the question was, along with you bringing up the fact earlier where his focus is totally on football for the first time in his entire career. What does that mean for development? And I agree with you that listed at 225, I think if they can get him up to 235, that would be an awesome offseason if his body can handle that weight and he can continue to play with. Because I think people don't realize he's sneaky, really, really athletic. I think people
sneaky. He's an incredible athlete. He plays center field. He was drafted as a center fielder.
I know this. I think there are people who don't think that, who might think tough, hard-nosed, all the
Well, let me address. Can I address the people who don't know this?
Go ahead.
He was drafted as a center fielder in the MLB. Those people out there aren't just standing around doing nothing. Those are real athletes. Like Bryce is hands down one of the better athletes on the football team, and it may not look like that from the way that he plays, but
I think it looks that way from how he plays. I think it looks that way the way he plays. I was about to do my own little he's an amazing athlete. I just don't. My only concern is if he adds 10 pounds, does he lose a little of that pop? Because the way he was flying around at times this year, I was like, oof, that's exactly what you're looking for. So I'm just really intrigued by what this year looks like for him for a variety of reasons. And you don't have to sell me on him being a good athlete. I'm with you. I just know there's folks reading the message boards who have all sorts of opinions about certain players that I just want to address if we can in the most direct manner possible.
I won't get into the message board. I will say somebody on our message board today called Jamari Caldwell fat. I was like, really? Jamari Caldwell, this ginormous, unbelievable athlete? Come on. Stupid.
Cornerbacks, where none of these guys can be called fat, I don't think. This is another. I mean, we'll get into the defensive backfield where it's just like a free for all essentially at this point, with the exception of a couple of spots. This one's really interesting for a couple of reasons. There's a couple of wild cards that I'm curious to see what you think of here. You also have 3 oars at one position, so
I don't know.
That's exactly what that means. It's what Oregon under Mario had on every depth chart was 4 oars for every position, which was super encouraging. Go ahead and hit us what you got here at corner.
Sure. Field corner, I have Theron Johnson as a starter, and then boundary corner, I have Sione, Tosh, if you're listening. And then Jaleel Florence is a backup at field, and then Dakota Fields, Rod Pleasant, Ifeoma Badegwu, and Naeem Offord as the backups in the boundary cornerback position.
Jared, where's Brandon Finney? What an offense to him that he's not listed amongst these other guys.
I know. I know. But it's a really tough position because I think Theron Johnson is, he's a Big Ten second teamer this year, I believe, at Northwestern.
Yep.
I think he's a real dude. I think he can be the field cornerback. And for those who are unfamiliar, the better cornerback plays the field because they have more room to cover as you're playing the field side. And the still could be a very good cornerback plays the boundary, but it's just usually
And
the
it's
lesser
hashed.
of the
We're
two.
talking hash to sideline here is how we're
Hash to
defining
sideline is field, and then hash to the other
shorter
sideline.
to the other
The
side.
shorter
Okay.
sideline is the boundary. Yes. So it's usually where the least or the worst cornerback is, even though they could both be good. Like Oregon this year with Jabbar and Nico, it's just Nico played boundary more than Jabbar did. Just pretty simple. But I have Theron. I think can play the good field. I think he's good. I've watched some of his tape. He looks fun. Um, Physical guy, 5'11". I don't care about the height. It is what it is. And then Sione, like he could be the best cornerback in Oregon history.
Oh
To
Jesus!
me, no, I'm just kidding.
That
No, I
was
think he can
wow.
be awesome.
Yeah, I agree.
He's 6'4", like 200 pounds, runs like the wind. In all of the clips that he was out there on the field this year, I came away way too impressed for my own good. So that's why I have him as the starter and not Jaleel Florence, because I don't know what we're gonna get with Jaleel Florence. Like, it's just as simple as that. I talked to him after the Rose Bowl. He said that he was coming back. I've already published that on Duck Territory a while ago, but in the article, he talked about how he had a severe knee injury, and obviously he did because he was out for the year. But he didn't even know what it was because that's how severe it was. That it was more like doctor lingo than anything else. And that he had multiple surgeries on it. He said 2 surgeries, I believe. So I don't know. He could come back and be fully healthy, which would be great, and that gives Oregon another potential starting cornerback. But I'm putting him as a backup for right now because until I see him really take the field and show what he can do, and that he looks exactly the same as he did in 2023, then I'm just gonna put him there. And then for the backups to Sione, like could be anybody. Don't know. Um, if I had to pick a leader in the clubhouse,
You
I don't
couldn't.
know. I can't. That's the thing because Dakota Fields looks sick during the spring game. Just
Mhm.
kind of the similar to the same vibes as Sione, like big dude, 6'2", 200 pounds, runs like the wind, long, lengthy,
Rangy guy.
hurt, injured, season-long injury. So I got to see what he looks like. And this is just my own games. If somebody wants to do this at home, they don't have to listen to me. But my own brain says, who knows? Rod Pleasant um, kind of took a step back, quote unquote, this year, just because he was running track. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're a football player, sometimes it's much easier to just stick straight to football and learn there. So maybe he does, maybe he doesn't run track, but I think he's still planning on running track this year. Maybe he takes a step up and becomes that guy. And then Ifeoma Badegwu, I don't know.
No
He
idea.
was non-existent this entire season. I don't think he saw the field this year at all.
He he
And
he was so non-existent that James Krepia forgot he was a top 40 recruit and just thought he was basically they kicked him off, they booted him from the team and he wasn't ever going to play. And I had to remind him, no, this was like one of the biggest recruits
one
they
of the
signed
best cornerbacks in the
and ever
country, in the high
and the best
school ranks.
corners
Yeah.
they've ever signed. Like, I don't think that's what's happening, but he wasn't even dressing for home games at points this year.
No. I think it stopped like after non-con, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw him every day in practice.
It was very confusing.
More or less. So again, that's why there's a giant or next to his name. And then Naeem Offord, who is the highest rated cornerback recruit I think Oregon has ever signed, if I remember correctly. And I have no idea if he's going to be a first year contributor. It's really hard to be a first year contributor for Oregon. There are few and far between players, even though Dan says, if you're good enough, you're old enough. That's not really the case. They don't play freshmen that much here at Oregon. 2 this year, probably just a handful last year. So we'll see if Naeem Offord. I mean, this is one of the best cornerbacks in the entire country coming out of high school this year. So maybe he is that good. Maybe he will be a real contributor this year for Oregon. But unfortunately for him, they have a plethora of really talented cornerbacks in the room that have come there in years prior. This could be a transfer portal room, maybe. I doubt it. But if the right player
Oh man,
presents himself in the portal,
I just I just think there's so many names, Jared. I get it. I just think there's so many
Just
names
saying.
here already.
Oh yeah, no, don't get me wrong. There's
So
3 oars. So
and honestly, you could add more because I mean Finney and Brew were borderline.
yeah.
One was a 5-star, one was a 5-star, was barely missed out on that designation at the end. And so there's basically 3 5-star true freshman corners who are also on this team. Offord's already on your list, but like it's anybody's game. And the obvious place to start for me is Jaleel, and just how much of a wild card this is, in such a unique situation of a guy who was not only a starter in 2023, but I think a really good starter and had some awesome moments where he played legit NFL competition and held his own. Like there was a reason that Oregon struggled a little in the second half up in Seattle, and that was in part because he, I think, got hurt in the third quarter of that game. And obviously Kyrie also was knocked out, but like rest in peace. But so Jaleel's somebody who I'm with you. Like I think the average fan and just most people thinking this through would go, that guy's going to be a starter if he's healthy. But the question is he ever going to be healthy and the same player he was before? And not to harken back to a name we brought up on Monday, but I can't help but think of Junior Anguilao, and there was a defensive lineman who I think transferred from the SEC like 4 years ago, same kind of thing where he just never played. He was hurt.
Was it the Clemson fella?
Yes, Clemson. You're right, Clemson.
Oh God, I don't remember his name.
But these kind of guys who show up and there's expectation of, they're going to do something, but the physical part just never comes together, and they're not able to play. I hope that's not the end of this Jaleel Florence story, because I still think he's one of your 2 most talented corners on this roster. But if he's not physically ready to go, then you are going to have to look at some other options. I don't know what to do with all these young guys either. I mean, these guys are all really excited. Like, you could convince me of the guys that you have not starting on your 2 deep that like 4 of them are NFL players at some point. Like there's just a bunch of talent we're running through there. And it's just who ends up being the guy. We don't know. And so that's going to be, to me, one of the more fun position groups in spring, is just seeing what these guys look like. And then probably not going to get any actual type of depth chart or sense of who's actually in what position in spring, probably not even in fall, but just to try to get a sense, maybe talking to coaches of like who's popping here. Because to your point, Jared, you could have both the starters right. You could have both the starters wrong. It could be a name not even on this list. Like who knows, Dorian Brew might be an amazing player immediately, and he's
He might
pushing to start. Like
I have no idea.
I'm not discounting that at all. And so, it's a really fascinating group. It's a group where, we'll be honest, this last season, it was kind of make or break at the very, very end. And it has been make or break when Oregon's played elite competitions the last 2 years. This group physically probably has a little bit more talent at certain points than some of these other groups that have gone against elite receiving talent, but it's also unproven. It's so hard to pick from that. I can see being a little bit wary of this group early on in a season, by also looking with the schedule, with the exception of playing Penn State right before the first bye week, there's not really a pass offense that gets you too concerned. So I'm fascinated, absolutely fascinated by this group and how all this comes together, especially with what Jaleel can and can't provide, because I do think that's kind of a linchpin for this whole thing here.
No, I agree 100%.
All right.
Let's get to safeties.
Let's get to safeties. This pod's already almost an hour. This is, Jared, slightly more straightforward, I imagine, than corner, but there's still some stuff we have to discuss here, especially at one of the starting safety spots, depending upon a couple of things that might have to happen.
I think potentially 2 of the starting safety spots, but we'll get to that. Boundary safety of Dylan Thieneman, the Purdue transfer, the number 1 overall safety in the transfer portal. Have him starting at boundary. It's where he played basically all season last year and the year before at Purdue. And then Peyton Woodyard as his backup. Free safety, Kobe Savage, who has a junior college eligibility waiver, was not good at the Rose Bowl, but was a good safety for the rest of the year. Pretty simple. Had some real problems in the Rose Bowl, but was a very valuable member of the defense for the previous 13 games, or 12 and a half. Big Ten championship game wasn't his greatest too. Kingston Lopez, the backup there, just, hulking 6'4", 215-pound free safety, which sounds perfect. That's exactly what I would have in my defense. And then at the star, Dalen Austin as the starter. He was the backup star last year to Brandon Johnson. And then I have Solomon Davis as the second string star who played star in the spring game. Before Brandon Johnson got to campus, he was on one side, Dalen was on the other. I think he led the green team, whatever it was, in tackles with 8 or 10, if I remember correctly. So,
Yeah.
which we were all kind of impressed by. But it's much more cut and dry here. But there's still a lot of question marks considering Kobe Savage has not made an announcement yet on if he will return. He has the opportunity to, was non-committal after the season in the locker room. And then Dalen Austin has a court date. He was indicted on, I believe it was vehicular manslaughter. So I don't remember when the court date is off the top of my head, but
I believe it's.
that will
I
be
think it's sometime next month. I'll look it up as you talk.
sure. That will be something to watch, something that could develop. And depending on what happens, Oregon could be without basically their starting star for the next season. So we'll see there. But those are the two big question marks. I think if both things go poorly in terms of Oregon's favor, and both of those players aren't able to play next year, I think Lopa and Solomon Davis could be fine potential replacements, but that could be another place where you're looking for a transfer portal addition. There's still Aaron Flowers who's out there. Again, I kind of make my decisions based off of how I saw players play the year before. And Aaron Flowers, I think, had 3 snaps last year. So just one, excuse me. Or just played in one game, 9 total snaps. Like, it was clear that they favored Woodyard and Davis above him, but we'll see. I think he still could be a very talented player, but that's another name to add in there.
I'd also throw out Trey McNutt, another one of those true freshmen, just a guy who could or could not be an impact player. It's hard with the true freshman. He's just was a 5-star at one point. At one point was the highest rated safety in the class. It's hard. February 19th date for Dalen Austin.
So in a month.
Yeah. So we'll got about a month to see what happens there. And I'm with you, Jared. And I guess and I want to be careful with how we talk about the Dalen situation because we're talking about a football team and there's somebody who was killed in something pretty serious that happened a year ago. So I don't want to make light of any of that. But to your point about the importance and the impact on this particular football team, if Dalen is found guilty and does not play, you're right. I think you have to probably take a look at the portal. And the positive way this plays out is you will have the spring window after spring practice to go find a solution if that happens. I also wonder how many of these corners that aren't currently have a spot could cross-train and play here. I'm going to guess there's, based upon size and all that, there's several guys that could fill in there to make things make a little bit more sense. So that's also something I would think about.
I've seen people bring up Theron Johnson, the Northwestern kid, as a possibility to move there. I don't know where these people are getting this from. He's played like 1,600 snaps in his career. 1,400 of them are the wide corner. Like, what makes you think he's just going to suddenly transition? Like, this is his position. He's a wide corner. There could certainly be another guy that comes in and moves into star. It could be Jaleel. I know that he was cross-training in 2023. Oregon loves to cross-train their secondary guys, so maybe somebody sticks there. But for Theron, I think he's very clearly a wide corner, and Oregon is bringing him in here to be a wide corner. And whether that's a starter, whether that's the guy who's first off the pine, we'll find out eventually. But regardless, he's going to be an important part of the defense, I think.
Yeah, we'll see some guys cross-train, and that'll give us a sense of maybe what the contingency plans are for Dalen. I wouldn't be surprised at all. And again, we're not going to get to see a ton of these practices anyway, but there have been times in the past where we've shown up and it's been like, oh, Triquez Bridges was a corner, and now he's one of the deep safeties with the group today, or whatnot. So those were the days.
Different world, yeah.
So there's the Dalen story. You're right with Kobe Savage. It's really hard if it doesn't work out for him necessarily to determine which are the true freshmen or formerly true freshmen, soon to be redshirt freshman you like there. Flowers was the more highly regarded guy. Lopa got in, I think, primarily because of a matchup with Tyler Warren. I don't know how much it means. I don't know how much we're really drawn from that. So it's basically a coin flip. And again, Trey McNutt is a guy who is more highly regarded than any of these guys. And he's pretty well developed and had a really nice he's been playing really well, I should say, at some of these high school All-American game practices. So this is another one where you're looking at depth and you're going, it's going to be some guys who just haven't played much. And that, again, is what you try to do as minimal as possible if you're Oregon. But when you've recruited the way you have, I think you've got some options that at least make sense. And just one other thing, unless you had more thoughts on that part, because I wanted to touch on Dylan and just the significance of that addition slightly more.
I just had the just stats on Kingston. Played 5 games this year, 24 total snaps. His career high is 7 snaps against Penn State and Purdue. There's not a lot to go off there. But he did play. He did see the field, and then after the Penn State game, obviously there's only one more game left, but never saw the field during the Rose Bowl. So I don't know. It's going to take. We'll see if Kobe comes back. We'll see if that's even his position, if he sticks it free or if he goes to boundary. And there's a whole lot of subcontext there, but again, this will all be found out in April, hopefully.
And then just on Thieneman, this is such a big addition for this defense. I hope that's appreciated. He's the number 1 rated safety in the portal. I think his overall ranking is almost misleading. I mean, this was an All-American as a freshman at Purdue who produced. Yeah. We talked about the production needed by Betcher to be an All-American. Go look at what Thieneman's stats were. Thieneman. I'm going to have a hard time being consistent with that name because I've mispronounced it. I pronounced it 3 different ways already today. But go look at Dylan's stats his freshman year at Purdue. I mean, it was outrageous. Like over 100 tackles. He had 6 interceptions. I want to say he had 4 forced fumbles. Like it was outrageous what he was able to do. And then this last year was a little bit of a step down. But when you go watch the player,
I mean, he didn't get the 6 interceptions. All he did was 104 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and a sack as a safety. So it was.
It's a disappointment. It's a disappointment, Jared. We didn't have the. But my point is that the numbers weren't quite what they were as a freshman. But if you go watch what this guy does, he is. Again, I'll just say it: Bryce Betcher, Dylan Thieneman, 2 white guys, very, very athletic. That needs to be said. These are elite athletes. Skin color. Disregard it for these guys, probably in general, if you want to. It's just a general rule. But this is the best athlete I think Oregon's had at safety, maybe since Javon. And I don't know how much pushback you could create that would make me change my mind. Because while I've liked the safeties Oregon has had, Evan Williams had a great rookie year for the Packers. Was starting until he got hurt, looked really good for as good as he's played. And I know Verone was a consensus All-American. Just a little bit different levels of explosiveness in my mind, a little bit different levels of size and range. And I just happen to think this guy is going to be really special and is going to be a player that is a difference maker at a position which has been problematic at times against elite competition. So I just wanted to highlight that. We might not know necessarily what's happening around him in this position group, but I feel really, really good about him being a cornerstone piece for this defense, and especially at safety.
Yeah, he's incredibly versatile. We talked about it. He had back-to-back seasons of over 100 tackles, which means that he's good on the perimeter and good in the run game. And then he's had 6 career interceptions and 9 career pass deflections. So he can play in the secondary as a real defensive back going against the pass. So, like you said, there could be a lot of moving parts in this safety room moving forward over the next couple of months. But yeah, to have him as the key guy, the cornerstone, the guy who's never going to leave, but the one that that he's going to be there this upcoming season is really, really important for Oregon. And I was thinking about, I agree with you. I think he's probably the most athletic since Javon. There's really not a lot of other options, if I'm being frank.
It's like Brian Addison, just based upon pure athletic tools, is probably comparable. But when you just think about who he was as a player and being kind of averse to contact at times, I just don't think there's he was rangier and also very athletic. But that's the first name I thought of that would be I would have a rational conversation and be okay, maybe but I still don't think so.
Yeah, it's kind of been a position that's been a thorn in Oregon's side in the last couple of seasons. They've just had safeties who have been impressive in moments and certainly impressive against the run. But when it's come to these really good passing attacks, they've been taken advantage of. Taishim, or could go back to Evan and Bennett Williams, and all these guys the last couple of seasons hasn't been really that great. And I say that as somebody who has Kobe Savage in their starting depth chart for next year. But this is having Dylan behind Kobe in terms of on the field. That's a much different idea of a defense. That he's going to help out a lot. He's going to be rangy. He's going to be able to come downhill. He's going to be able to cover man on man or cover in zone over the top. This is a safety that Oregon hasn't had in a while, and I'm very interested to see what it looks like in Dan's defense. It'll probably be very enjoyable for Oregon fans to watch, because, and for Dylan too, because he's going to have real people watching him. He's not going to be working at Purdue anymore. But I mean, here's how he ended the season last year in terms of tackles. He went 10, 11, 8, 11, 10. It's good. Against Northwestern, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, and Indiana. So this guy performs. He also took 2 punts, so he was a punt returner. Again, another thing about his athleticism. He's a monster, and I don't think that people appreciate how good of an addition this was for Oregon very early on in the transfer portal cycle as well.
Yep. I don't got anything. I don't got anything else either, Joe. We've done 100 and we've done 67 minutes so far. I think that's all we've got here.
Yeah, I agree. I think Bryce and Dylan, early White Boy of the Year candidates.
There we go.
Them and Timothy Chalamet. They're all boom, boom, boom.
Are you going to see the Bob Dylan thing? Are you going to go check that out?
I have to go see Nosferatu, man. I haven't even seen that yet. But I've heard our Lord and Savior Tim is pretty good in that.
Yeah, as somebody who has a Bob Dylan lyric quote up on his wall over here, I'm real. I don't know, man.
Have to.
I think. Well, I think I have to, but I'm also just not wanting to buy into the Chalamet hype, even though everything I've seen him in has been amazing, which is the hard part for me.
What do you mean the hype?
He's amazing. He's incredible.
He's legit. Sorry. He's as good as it comes.
He is very, very good. I just I don't know if it yeah, it'll be good. I'm sure it'll be good. I'm skeptical, but we'll go check it out and we'll report back on this podcast as everybody listening needs to hear.
I can't believe you don't have love for Tim.
Yeah.
Brings me no joy.
He was great in the Dune movies.
Yeah, he's great in everything.
Yeah, he's great.
He's sick. Yeah. Early White Boy of the Year contenders. There you go. All right. Am I leading this out? I guess I am, because I hosted this. I'm no longer in the host position. But thank you, everybody, for listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast. Leave a like, subscribe, 5-star review on wherever you listen to your podcast would be greatly appreciated by all of us here at duckterritory.com. That's it for us. I think that's going to do it. So thank you all again for listening.
Talk to you later, folks.